Morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm not going to take 10 minutes. Let me just introduce myself and this topic briefly. My name is Jeff Neal. I'm, as Debbie said, a Senior Vice President at ICF. I've been there for about 3.5 years since I left the government. I had 33 years in government, starting when I was 7. My last job was as Chief Human Capital Officer for the Department of Homeland Security, one of the really easy HR jobs in the community.
Yeah.
Right, Rich? And I'm sure it hasn't changed. And so I spent a lot of time in government. I did HR work for 33 years, 32 of 33 years. And so I'm very familiar with the HR business and how it works because it was basically my life's work. Since I left DHS and government, I've been at ICF. I've also been writing a blog that I would encourage you to check out. It's called chiefhro.com. I write as much as I have time to write, which usually ends up being about 1 blog post a week. My most read blog post got about 100,000 views, and that was one called "How Long Does It Take to Crush a Federal Employee?" That one got a lot of response. One of the things I've found in blogging is that one of the key tools is social media. And so when you look at social media, how social media has transformed not just this country, but the world, it's really pretty remarkable. It used to be that people would go to town squares, and we lived in small towns, and people would go out to the town square, or maybe even the big cities had their big squares as well, and people would go out and interact with one another, actual human beings interacting with actual human beings, and doing something that I think they call talking. People used to do that. Is that T-O-C-K or T-A-L-K? So people actually used to talk, but they don't as much anymore. They use social media. Facebook is a great example. How many monthly users do you think Facebook has?
100 million?
1.4 billion with a B.
Wow.
1.4 billion with a B monthly users on Facebook. Twitter has hundreds of millions of users. And it's interesting, if you look at who gets the most followers, I think Justin Bieber has more followers than the President of the United States. So Twitter does have its priorities, I guess. But obviously social media has transformed the way people communicate, and it's actually replaced the town square in most people's lives, and it's replaced talking in a lot of people's lives. This is no joke. I actually was sitting at home with my partner and my sister-in-law about 2 or 3 years ago, and I looked up and realized that we were all three sitting there with laptops on our laps, sending messages to one another. And I closed mine and said, okay, this is ridiculous. We are IMing one another. We should at least try this talking thing. So I'd like to go ahead and get into the panel discussion, and we're going to start talking about social media by talking about social media. But before we talk about how agencies are using social media for their own recruitment, I'd like each of the panelists to take just a couple minutes each and introduce yourself and your background so everyone will know clearly who we all are.
Great. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I'm Ellen Ardrey. I'm the director of what we call human development at the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. It's an organization, a little over 10,000 federal employees. I have not always been at NGA, and I just see Mika come in. I first knew Mika actually at DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency. I was an intelligence officer, and through circuitous means, made my way to DIA, and I was doing money. And as many of you know, in the federal sector that billets and money are very closely related. And so from money, I did billets, and from billets, the opposite end of the coin was then the faces that go in the spaces. So I was the deputy Chico at DIA. I'll tell people I'm not an HR professional. I've slept at a Motel 8. But I've been now involved in HR work for about 8 years. And was just delighted to have the opportunity to come to NGA, because in the intelligence community and in the Department of Defense intelligence community, they were doing some very exciting things. And so I just feel like I've had an opportunity to kind of complete an education in HR and do some of the more strategic things. Whereas in other jobs, sometimes we've gotten bogged down in a more tactical, interactive, transactional kind of world. And so I'm just delighted to be here and looking forward to hearing the conversation.
Thank you.
Good morning, I'm Annalisa Archer. I'm currently the Deputy Chief Human Capital Officer at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which has been a really interesting experience. CFPB is a brand new agency, it's a startup. They opened their doors in July of 2011, and so the experience there has been quite unique, and I think many of us who are working at CFPB were very attracted to the opportunity to try to build an agency from the ground up, and in some cases try out some things that maybe we had always wanted to try but were a little bit harder to get off the ground in a traditional federal environment or an agency that has a large infrastructure already in place. So it's been a fascinating experience kind of going through that process and simultaneously building an agency infrastructure at the same time you're trying to recruit and get people in the door to perform CFPB's critical mission work. So it's been a really fascinating experience, and both by necessity and both because we knew that it was critically important, we've invested very heavily in our recruitment outreach efforts in order to attract the absolute best talent we can to help American consumers. So I came to CFPB in the fall of 2012 after a career in government. I was a Chico at another agency before I came to CFPB, and have been doing work in and around federal HR for 20-some years. So excited to share kind of the experience of doing something maybe a little bit new and different, but certainly doing it from the ground up. So thanks for having me.
Good morning, my name is Martin Pursley, and I'm with the Department of Interior, where I oversee the Talent Management Division. And Interior's a fairly big organization, not as big as some of y'all's, but about 70,000 employees, but many more volunteers that also do work for us, which creates some challenges. So some of the unique challenges we might have as opposed to many agencies is that when we do our hiring, we do hire quite a bit a year of folks, but 86% of those are for temporary and seasonal type positions, which presents its own unique kind of challenge in that. So we're working through those challenges, trying to figure out how does that workforce become part of the succession plan for the permanent workforce, that holds is a bit smaller in the hiring percentages. My experience, I came to HR about 8 years ago. I spent a whole previous career in the Army, most of that in special operations. So I probably have a little bit different perspective on things maybe than some of my peers. I know in our organization, but I ended up coming into the federal government through the PMF program and worked at U.S. Geological Survey and then up to the Department of Interior to manage the special programs, and now I got talent management.
With Special Forces background, you probably have the ability to do to people some of the things that HR people would like to do to them. So it's probably a good transition.
Very nervous staying between special ops and intelligence. What do you know about me?
Do you get the cookie before? Or
Very diverse panel.
Very.
Good morning, my name is Janine Beatty. I'm from the Office of Personnel Management. I work in a different position than a lot of government agencies do, where I work for the reimbursable side of OPM. So not only do we help set the policy that governs hiring across the government, but we also help agencies implement and operationalize that policy. I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of different agencies over the last couple of years. I've actually been involved with OPM and HR for the past 14 years. So many years ago, many years ago, I started actually as a student intern and worked my way through. So I've had, I think, a lot of unique perspectives starting from the bottom and kind of working my way up to really appreciate the process that HR has and the process that we're able to help other agencies with.
Thank you. Before I get the panel's views on this issue, how many folks here use Facebook? How about Twitter? How about LinkedIn? So almost everybody here uses one of those three. Clearly they've transformed the world a lot in the last decade or so. Could each of you talk a little bit about what your agencies are doing to use either online professional sites like LinkedIn or social media like Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and any of the other dozen different types out there? Talk a little bit about what your agency's doing to use those kinds of tools for recruiting. And by the way, for folks in the room or on the phone, as we're going through these, if you come up with questions, by all means, let us know, and we'd like to get your questions on these subjects as we go through them as well. And then once we're done, if we have time, we'll also see if there are any other things that you'll like to ask the panel about that are not at all related to these questions. So,
Go first.
Well,
So I will preface this by saying the intelligence community was not an early adopter of social media, right? It's kind of counter to everything that they drill into your head early on, which is, you shouldn't be out there and you don't need an online presence. However, we've recognized that it is absolutely the way of the future. If we're going to connect with the new workforce, particularly college students, they're not going to usajobs.com, right? So they're working through LinkedIn, through Twitter, through Facebook. And so we've had to kind of hold our breath and jump in, and we are now, I think, really starting to see the benefits of that. We have about 46,000. That doesn't sound perhaps big to some of you. It sounds huge to us. We have about 46,000 followers on Facebook and about 27,000, I think, maybe 28,000 in LinkedIn. What's really exciting for us is, of course, not the tweets, but the retweets that you see, because, of course, those are the referrals and what used to be, in Jeff's parlance, the word-of-mouth referrals. And so we are starting to see that have an impact on how we recruit and go forward. One of the things that we're doing, again, that is a little novel for an intelligence agency is we're looking to use Skype-like technology that in an environment where you're not allowed to have cell phones in the building with you, and the idea of being able to use Skype on an open line is just an enigma, an anathema. I'll get it out there. But we're looking at the way to have an unclass Skype capability to be able to hold interview panels and interact with prospective students. And so we're excited about that opportunity.
So yeah, Ellen's right. I mean, out in the digital universe is where people are, and from our perspective, and why that's important is not only that's because that's where people are, but it's where your passive job seekers are, right? So CFPB has been very intentional as we've built our recruitment strategy in recognizing that a lot of the job market is not actively looking for jobs, right? Only 16% of people are, of job seekers are active job seekers. The other 84% of the talent pool are somewhere else. They might be thinking about looking, they may be perfectly content in their job and not thinking about looking at all. And so where the real power of the digital community comes in is leveraging tools like LinkedIn to really try to create a brand, to create an awareness about your organization, to create excitement about your organization and what you're doing, in an effort to try to spark some of those passive job seekers to say, I didn't think about that before, but maybe I'll think about it now because I've had some exposure to this organization, I've seen something, or a CFPB recruiter has actively reached out to me through a LinkedIn or other type of community because I have a skill set or a profile that they're looking for in their workforce. And so for us, it's been a very different orientation because the post and pray just does not work, right? I mean, it just it doesn't work. So we've really tried to leverage social media to build those pipelines of talent, even before we have vacancies. As a startup, obviously we've had a lot of vacancies, so we've been able to have kind of an instant return on investment. We're building relationships, we're finding talent pools, and we happen to have a lot of jobs to offer because we're starting up. But even now, as we're reaching more of a steady state type of environment, we're still just as actively trying to mine and maintain those interest communities so that when we do have a specific opening in the future, you've got a ready pool of people that you would hope would be attracted to that versus having to start that very lengthy process of trying to create interest, explain who you are, and try to get somebody in the seat. So I think that's the real power to leveraging social media, and it helps you do that in a way that you can't do through traditional means. The other thing that we found really powerful about LinkedIn is it's also enabled us to marry up our recruitment strategy with our diversity strategy. And I think a lot of times in traditional recruitment in traditional federal agencies, there's sometimes a struggle and a tension between achieving diversity and doing recruitment because sometimes those functions have belonged to different parts of an agency. What social media allows you to do, and LinkedIn is a prime example, they have something called the Professional Diversity Network, which is an affiliation that enables you to reach countless diversity websites, and people don't have to access them through LinkedIn. So if you're on iHispanio or one of these other sites, if you're a member of the Professional Diversity Network, you're able to get your brand awareness and your job opportunities out there to a larger community. And so for us, we've really tried to construct a recruitment strategy that integrates from the very beginning stages that diversity outreach as well. So I think there's a real power in the online community of helping agencies do better in that space because that traditionally has been really difficult for a lot of agencies.
Yeah, and at DOI, I resonate a lot with what they had said, but I guess we're a little bit more traditional. We're dipping our toes into the social media piece. We haven't jumped all the way in yet, and a lot of it has to do with culture, honestly, and moving our culture within internally to us, to be comfortable, and it's a lot about comfort, really, comfortable in dealing with that social media because there's a feeling of just you got to kind of let go in order to do that, and it's not as controlled maybe as an environment. It's more like us going out and talking to each other in a sense. We have some bureaus that do Twitter. They're starting to Twitter their announcements out there. And let me preface that a little bit. DOI is very engaged in social media from the mission standpoint. So I don't want to, not like we're not engaged in social media. I mean, we're all over the place from a mission standpoint, but where we got to bridge is getting the employer branding standpoint aligned to that, and into the social media. We have efforts right now to build our presence on LinkedIn and to use the LinkedIn. Matter of fact, I looked at some CFPB stuff, to kind of, to build our LinkedIn presence and to help drive applicants or candidates or just exposure. We have some rich stuff out there. We have very rich stories out there, and but they all are held up in this mission piece, right? And we're not getting those stories to potential candidates, to drive that interest level for us. And so that's one of the things that we're working on doing with the social media. And I think the other side of that, for me, when I look at social media, I think what a tremendous opportunity to engage your employees, to really engage the workforce in your recruitment strategy, right? I mean, that allows them to have that conversation. It doesn't have to be on the organizational LinkedIn page. It can be on their personal LinkedIn page, and to promote your organization and do those things. So I'm really excited about our engagement. I think DOI's got a lot of great stories to use out there. It's a matter of getting the comfort in the organization, I think, to move that forward. And in some places that will be more rapid than other places. But
Janine?
I think OPM has been always, on the outside, no one really knows who OPM is. So if you're not a government employee, you have no idea what agency I'm from. If you're within the government, you know who OPM is, but you hardly ever heard from them. And social media has just given OPM the advantage to be able to get out there through Facebook, through Twitter, through the YouTube channels. There's just so many opportunities that we've been able to take advantage of to get the information out there that I don't think was ever passed out on a widespread basis like it is now. So just having that opportunity is something that's unlike anything we've ever experienced in the last 10 or 20 years. We also don't have the budget to be able to go out and do large, giant marketing events or commercials or different kinds of promotions that either private sector or even some large agencies have. And just being able to use these free sites is just something that we want to take advantage of and be able to use just to get the information out there to people and be able to promote our agency, promote the efforts and the initiatives that OPM is starting and what we're doing, and just put that visibility out there. It also has given us the opportunity to be able to hear back from the public, to hear back from agencies, to get information and act on that and starting new laws or new regulations and new initiatives. So just being able to hear from people on a personal level about what they're interested in and what they want to see happen in federal hiring has just been something that we want to take advantage of, and we love having the opportunity out there. On a recruitment scale, we've been able to do virtual job fairs where it's given people the opportunity to participate in government job fairs where they may not have been able to travel to DC to be able to participate in those kind of things, and given us this cost-effective structure that we can use to really be able to recruit in ways we've never been able to do in the past.
Thank you. Just for anybody on the panel, one of the things that a lot of agencies experience with social media is that agencies were very used to the idea that their public communications were controlled and funneled through a public affairs office or a communications office or someplace that got to say what got posted where. Have any of you run into anything like that with recruiting or any other kinds of outreach you're trying to do where they're not quite comfortable yet with the freewheeling flow of information?
Yeah. We do have some of that, but I wouldn't say it's particularly onerous.
Okay.
Yeah, we definitely experienced that in OPM. I think in the beginning it was a lot more restrictive where we couldn't just put everything out there. But as time has gone on and our own communications office has seen the benefit of us putting information out, it's become an easier process where we can get that information out there more immediately than in past years.
Any questions on the social media subject from anyone here in the audience? Yes, ma'am.
I guess for us, it's just having to kind of grab that message before it goes viral without you. And I think so some of the things like YouTube and, getting that message ahead of you before people just start writing about you and all of the things that are happening, especially with NSA. Is anyone thinking about how to get to some of those layers? Like, do you do YouTube clips? Do you start to go out where your kids are playing apps? So, like, how do you stay ahead of the curve? I think that's...
Can you repeat the question?
Because I think as soon as you have one technology, it's already moved forward.
If you could just...
Sure, yeah. So for those of you who may not have been able to hear, the question was around, how do we kind of stay on the cutting edge of new emerging technologies related to recruitment and retention? Does that capture the essence of it?
Yeah.
Right. So you may have just now figured out Twitter or Facebook, but now you've got this thing called WhatsApp and God knows what. You hear about the Internet of Things, and wearables. So, to what extent are you kind of already thinking ahead about how you can harness the power of some of these other communication technologies?
I would offer one thing, which is, and I think Martin, you said this, there is a lot of emphasis on social media, but I think some of the traditional techniques actually help you identify what are the emerging trends and what's coming next, right? So I think another source that we listen to very carefully are particularly the students that we're bringing in through our intern program, We work with the Partnership of Public Service and through their Student Ambassadors program, so that when we have interns who complete their experience, they go back onto campus and exchange and kind of help build our brand and awareness. So I almost think in that sense, in terms of keeping your finger on the pulse of what's emerging, you almost go back to the more old school techniques, and it's more about, what are people, what are those student ambassadors hearing on the ground? What are the new things that are coming out? So I think it's kind of that cycle. So we'll do, a lot of focus groups with our interns, with our student ambassadors, to make sure we kind of are asking those types of questions, like what networks are working for them as they're on campus trying to establish these communities. And you'll hear, about things, kind of through that level, and then you can kind of say, oh, well, let's look into that. Let's see what that looks like, and maybe that would be something that we might want to pursue going forward.
Any other questions from the room? Yes.
How do you handle the workload required to respond to everything in a timely fashion? Do you
The
have
question-
a person, like a full-time person that just does, that answers your social media responses and does folks do?
Yeah, so the question, if I might paraphrase, is you've got these great tools, a lot to harness there, but how do you literally respond to every social media interaction, right? What does that workload look like? Does that capture the essence? Yep.
So I'm actually going to, what is it, the call a friend, dial a friend?
Phone a friend.
Phone a friend. I actually have with me Ms. Kara from NGA, who has a great background. She was one of our student interns. She moved from managing our intern program as a student intern and has recently gone over to our recruiting team. So I think some of the magic of where we're successful is we're harnessing the demographic, the population that is connected to some of the new and emerging trends and the apps that are being used. But I'm going to let her talk about how we handle the workload, because that would be her job.
So there are two things to answer the question that came from the back. There are two things that NGA does. So there is a team in our Office of Corporate Communications that handles kind of the questions that come in on Twitter and Facebook and things like that. So a lot of those responses are we've already gotten the questions maybe once or twice, so we know how to answer them. We also do something about once a year called the Twitter Town Hall, and this is something that the president actually did first, and we at NGA are the first in the intelligence agency to also do this, but it gave applicants an opportunity to get live feedback from recruiters. So the position or the open opportunity at that time was for our student internship program. So a lot of the questions were geared around that. So we had myself, who served as a subject matter expert. We had other individuals from different departments within our agency to provide live feedback to the applicants. So a lot of the stuff that comes through Twitter, again, and Facebook are done using a team, and then we utilize the Twitter Town Hall platform to provide live feedback. And that's done about once a year.
So I wanted to just chime in one other thing. This is Mika, and it's interesting that you all spoke about the issue of, letting a little bit of the control go when you're talking about social HR and engaging with potential applicants, your talent pool, your candidates that you're trying to recruit, whether they're passive or active. But part of this conversation is also about retention. And so you mentioned engagement. And it's interesting, I'd like to know if you're thinking about, and of course in partnership with the social media teams in your agencies, how you might also let go some of that control and forward-facing type interaction with your existing employees, and what that might mean from an employee engagement perspective as you're leveraging social media as well. Because it almost seems like as you tread a little bit further on the recruitment piece, it might open the doors to thinking about letting it go a little bit and engaging more and having more real-time communication, something that I know CFPB does really well, something that I know the intelligence community is looking at, and I know OPM's social media team right now is really gathering work groups across the government looking at employee recognition groups via social media and what that might look like across government. So I throw that out there to see if there anything that you're thinking about with regards specifically to employee engagement.
Well, I think that that's kind of one of the comfort levels we're trying to get to, and where I'm driving, I think in DOI is that your employees, once they engage, they become multipliers for your recruitment efforts and everything. I mean, so it just really makes business sense also, right? You know, and you know, we don't monitor employees when they go out, or anyone in the organization when they go out and have a conversation. You know, they go out to happy hour, they have conversations. Hopefully, they're talking good about your organization. You know. Depends on how many drinks I suppose they have, you know. But you know, they do it when they're at the grocery store or wherever, right? With their families or whatever. Well, you know, to your point earlier, I mean, the social media wave is now kind of well, it is a primary source of communication now. And I know I got 2 kids in their 20s, and I mean, they'd rather do that than talk sometimes. I believe, you know, and I think that to get to that point is really where you want to get, and then that feeds into your question and how you manage that workload. You know, I have a hard enough time managing the 3 email accounts that my office sees, you know, for some of the special employment programs. We get tons of emails in those things, right? I don't have the resources to manage a LinkedIn account and Twitter and all this. So what does that mean? That means I got to get the managers comfortable with it. I got to get HR comfortable with letting the managers be comfortable with it, right? You know, and then they got to get the employees comfortable with really being that that mechanism for us. You know, that those multipliers out there for us. I think the beauty of it is in the engagement piece is then see employees start to invest in your organization because they're investing their words and their time and all that. So then all of a sudden now your engagement starts to get, you know, permeate throughout the organization.
I would add too, I mean, I think I've seen some of the ways in which, and it is a tension, right? Because organizations are worried about the control facet and what are people talking about and around what. One model that I've seen that I think can be very effective and can help mitigate some of that concern about control is trying to channel employee input through some ideation platforms. So at NARA or at CFPB, we have something called Project Boldness, which is employees voluntarily work on this, and it's a kind of an idea challenge type of thing where they ask other employees or will post a challenge like how can we improve X, or what would be, you know, the next thing that we should look at in this area. And so you get a lot of active participation. You feed that desire for that instant communication and that kind of iterative collaboration online. But it's channeled in a way that I think helps the organization feel like it's towards a business-oriented type of purpose. So that's something that I've seen. It's not at all unique to us. I know many agencies do that, you know, through IdeaBox and other types of things like that. The other example I was going to mention, I know, you know, another area which I saw when I was at the National Archives is for organizations who've invested in online collaboration tools internally within their organizations. So at the National Archives, they had a tool called the Internal Collaboration Network. And that was a really powerful tool. And you know, frankly, I think organizations are nervous launching those types of tools. But when you know, those tools I think have the effect of being able to have employees find online communities within the workplace, and they feel that they have a greater degree of connectedness, especially if you have an organization that's not all geographically in the same place. And I think for organizations that are geographically dispersed, that provides a level of connectivity and helps to mitigate kind of that traditional headquarters versus field dynamic, or people feeling like they're not getting access to information in real time that's coming out of headquarters. I think, you know, if for organizations that are still a little concerned about the loss of control, those may be some areas that, you know, could give maybe a little bit more comfort in terms of how to tiptoe into that space without it being, you know, a full-blown, oh my gosh, what's everyone doing all the time.
And understanding the rules of engagement too. I mean, you know, making sure that, you know, that HR managers, you know, that HR works with managers so they understand what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. You know, you can't go and just solicit for resumes to be sent directly to you, you know, for instance, you know, but you can certainly go out and say, I got this great opportunity and here's where you can go to apply, or how you can apply, you know.
Have any of you run into situations where employees using social media are behaving in ways that you wouldn't expect them to behave in the workplace. One of the things people notice in social media is that some of the good manners that we expect when we're dealing with a human being and doing this talking thing don't seem to exist when you're interacting with a keyboard. And people will say things that they might not say when they're sitting and talking to. Yes.
I think we do have that, absolutely. Could I go back, because I actually wanted to jump on something Martin said. One of the ways that NGA addressed the risk, specifically with regard to recruiting, is we started a program called the Ambassador Program, where we went out and solicited interest from the workforce, those who wanted to be deputized as recruiters, essentially. And we put them through training to make sure they understood not only what they could and couldn't say, but that they weren't making promises to potential applicants. And really, I think we just started this about 8 months ago. We have 175 trained ambassadors right now. And they were both because the individual expressed interest, it was engaged, but also there was a management level to say, yes, this is a kind of person that we would want representing the agency. So there was still a little bit of that, control piece of it. But we've had a tremendous number of people express interest, and there is a training component. So there's a not insignificant commitment of time to be ready to do that. So I'm sorry, I just wanted to offer that.
Just to go on about that, I think it's really good to see that more agencies are doing that now, because I think 15 years ago there used to be a standard that there were these recruitment teams and agencies, that was not only their job, but something that they were passionate about going out and doing. And I think I've always looked at HR as like this cycle that comes back around, and I think we're definitely coming back around to that time where we again need to make that commitment. And the commitment has to include these social media avenues and using them strategically and learning how to use them in ways that can be effective for bringing in the group that you need.
And what we found is that our recruiters are not technical experts in our area. A lot of times prospective employees, they really want to get down and dirty and dug into, you want to get them excited about the technology and the tradecraft, and that's not something a recruiter is going to bring. You need somebody who practices it day to day, and so that's how we've been able to leverage that and scratch that itch.
So your ambassadors are from
Subject
the
matter experts in the operational side, yes.
Do we have any questions from anyone on the phone? Phone people?
By the way, you have permission to go off of mute.
Yes, you can unmute now. It works.
Yes, hi, this is Jeff Brody with the Kent Blanchard Companies. Question not so much about the approach or strategy, but more from a procurement or spend point of view. I hear a lot of commonality among the various approaches to social media, LinkedIn, Facebook, and so forth. Are there any thoughts that the panel has about the way in which the government procures? And what I'm really asking is from the point of view of, are these procurements in the use of social media from a vertical or agency by agency, or does the government look to bundle their purchases, the procurement, into more of a single government-wide contract for LinkedIn, for example? Just a question more from a spend point of view.
I understand it to be individual. I'm not aware of any, kind of a more comprehensive. Is OPM looking at that? Do you know at all?
So OPM, there are certain areas that OPM has looked at doing government-wide things. Like I know recently they did a virtual career fair for the PMF program and looking at expanding that more wide. That ended up being a really successful event. Not only were the agencies happy who participated with it, but the students who came out and were able to do the event virtually and not have to spend the travel costs were really happy. So these are definitely areas that we're looking to expand on, but we also need that cooperation and that partnership from agencies out there who are interested in getting involved as well.
Yeah, this is Bill Fisher. I know that GSA will also look to negotiate sort of a government-wide discount, for lack of better words, and that there's a lot of energy right now around category management. So that could be something we could, go look into, but yeah.
Getting a government-wide program is probably one of the harder things to do, but I think that it's always on the horizon of something that everybody wants to get involved in, but actually the mechanics of making it happen is what usually gets in the way.
And usually you don't see the move toward government-wide contracts until there's really extensive use and a lot of dollars being spent on a particular thing, and then it starts to make sense to do a government-wide contract. But early on, and we're still relatively early on, I think, in the government's use of social media, it's probably a little premature for that. Did I hear somebody else about to ask a question on the phone?
I have a question.
Yes,
This is Andrea phoning from U.S. Probation here in Dallas, Texas.
Hi, Andrea.
I work for U.S. Probation, which is part of the federal judiciary. So we are a very small agency, relatively small, and we have very small HR departments in our district. My question, and I apologize ahead if you've already answered this question, but I had an employee come from my office, so I had to put you all on mute. I believe the young lady who stated that they had 46,000 Facebook followers, and I believe 26,000 Twitter followers. For, I guess, the person in that position that monitors the social media sites and responds, is that a full-time position? Is it a shared activity amongst everyone in HR? How do you delegate that task to make sure that questions are being answered and the website stays up to date?
Yes, that mic.
Okay. So it's a shared position. We actually collaborate, again, with our Office of Corporate Communications. So HR, we're HD, but HR and that office collaborate. We come together to create generic responses to our most frequently asked questions. So when we get these questions, we're able to easily answer them using just a cut and paste method, because again, a lot of the questions are redundant. And it is a team. It's a social media team within that Office of Corporate Communications. But if your office is small, your HR office is small, then I would just take the most frequently asked questions and do generic responses, and then when you get them, just copy and paste the information.
Okay. Super.
Okay. And I think I have another question.
Okay.
My idea is to host maybe a question and answer forum, or just putting out to the community what probation officers actually do, because not too many people understand how complex the position is. So do you ever host those live communications with the public? I guess via Skype?
So
Is that anything anyone does now?
So I'm just going to answer this and then you can jump in if you have the experience. But we did host our first live session last year, and it was called a Twitter Town Hall. It was during our open application period for our student internship program, and it allowed applicants to ask questions, and we would provide live feedback. It lasted about an hour, but again, they could ask anything as long as it wasn't, we weren't sharing confidential information, or it wasn't, kind of crazy. We did have some crazy questions, but again, we answered all the questions live. So anything from how to apply, what are some things that I would be doing as an intern, can you share your experience as an intern? Any question that they had, we were able to answer them live. And again, that was done during an open application period. So once it was over, they could go in and apply. They could apply while they were speaking to us, or if they had any questions on the application process itself, we were able to help them.
And I think you'll find that the best practice in dealing with this type of technology is a mix of live content and content that's kept online. One of the greatest benefits of it is the ability to time shift. So not everyone has to be interested in doing something at the same time and go to the same place electronically to do it. So that ability to time shift is also really important, so that the mix is live, gives you the immediacy, it gives you the ability for people to give you some rapid fire questions, and then having that information available to people outside of that live event gives you the time shifting ability.
The advances made in webinar technology now has made it, such an easier job for us to be able to host those type of events and get that information out there. That it's just something we love to take advantage of.
Doesn't OPM also offer, I found it interesting when I was there that you had a solution for some of the agencies called a realistic job preview. I think those were for some of the more complicated, like she's describing. I found that interesting, but I wasn't sure exactly what it was because I don't think it was necessarily in my area that I worked at OPM, but I think it was like a real preview for the applicants.
Yeah, what we've done is we also have town hall meetings with either employees, and we've also done it externally with other agencies, and given the option to provide that realistic job preview where someone walks in through a day in their life and provides that as an open view to those who logged into that event. And it's just been really helpful in providing information about jobs that people wouldn't normally have the information for.
And realistic job previews give you two really important benefits, at least two, there are probably a lot more. But one of them is it does help get more interest in jobs when people see what this job is really all about. The other that's equally important is it's a big driver of retention. I know in the Department of Homeland Security we had a number of jobs where people had this fantasy of what the job would be like because they watch TV shows and they think Homeland Security has an operations center that has massive monitors all over the room. They don't realize it's a dungeon-like space with 5-year-old PCs sitting in it. So they think that they're getting into something else. And so it's a huge driver of retention when people actually understand what it is that they're getting into when they get the job.
And when you have your assessment, discussion in March, that may be something that you want to ask some questions about with your IO psychologist types, because I agree completely. I mean, it also is a very powerful tool for enabling applicants to self-select out. Like once they see, they're like, oh my gosh, this is really what it is. No thanks. That's
actually how that came about with big data and HR analytics was too complex to put out an accurate job description without doing that. I also want to say for anybody in the room and anybody on the phone, since we are limited to an hour and 15 minutes, all panel members agreed if any government agency has additional questions for any of our panel members, just contact one of us on the flyer. I'm Debbie Brown. Let me know, and I will provide you the contact information for that individual.
So, any more questions on this subject before we move on to the next question? This is the first question, by the way. So I'm really happy with this panel. That this panel has been so engaging on one question. That's fantastic. Bill.
I've got one. I'm sorry. I'm the annoying person in the classroom that keeps raising their hand. By the way, you did fail to mention that HR has that big operations center, right? Or it had that at DHS?
Sure.
With all the screens, right?
Sure.
That's how you got your best candidates. So we've kind of started to touch a little bit on sort of like the candidate experience or the applicant experience. And I have a personal passion around human-centered design, and I'm certainly seeing a lot of discourse about applying human-centered design thinking principles to a lot of aspects of human capital learning and government operations in general. And so my question has to do with, to what extent do you see within your agency or other agencies almost like sending anthropologists out into the field to kind of observe your candidates in their natural setting, if you will, and try to understand some of those unarticulated, unmet candidate needs so that then you can design the optimal candidate experience so that presumably you'll get better candidates and that can also have a positive sort of externality for retention. So I know that was a rather complex question. Let me simplify it. Are you doing anything around designing or doing the kind of the customer journey mapping?
So I wouldn't say that we're quite there yet, but you're exactly right in terms of, and I'll just speak generally from a long career in government. I mean, we have to stop talking about government jobs the way we want to talk about them. Like, we just have to stop it because it doesn't resonate. And I think you're exactly right. And I don't know of many agencies that do this well yet. But I think it's important to really think about how you talk about the job and understand what are people really looking for, in that community. And I think, again, using some of these networks is a great way to try to start to elicit what that looks like. I think organizations that have done this well have invested in trying to explore what their employer value proposition is. They've gone out, they've done the focus groups. And I think the other real challenge is, I think agencies, all agencies at times have a tendency to oversell, right? Because we want to market the best of what there is in our agency, but you have to market what's true about your organization. And I think this goes to the point about the realistic job preview. You have to be very truthful about the experience, and even for a new organization like ours, where we have values that we want to be very innovative and we want to do things that are cutting edge. Those are values that we have, but we're a federal organization. And so what that means in a federal context is very different than what that means in a private sector context, right? And so when you're trying to recruit applicants from all different sectors, I think agencies have to be really careful that when you're saying these words and ascribing these values, that you're explaining what that means in our environment. So I can't agree with you more about how important that is.
Actually, that's a fascinating concept, and I had not thought to apply that. One of the things that I'm looking just internal to HR, my organization, to launch in the coming year is, I think sometimes we build these programs and we herald them and, we pat ourselves on the back that, look what I've delivered for our customer. And we never asked our customer what they thought, right? And we just think we've delivered this great thing. But there's a direct application to what you're suggesting, which is, figure out what the customer wants. Don't just build it and present it and then, applaud yourself for having delivered this wonderful thing that,
I'm sending you the list.
We got a bad one.
Could phone folks mute, please?
Yeah, this is. All right, if you can hear me, please mute your phone. Otherwise, we're going to auto-mute everyone.
Yeah, I just want to add to that. I think that, and you're absolutely right, I think what's missed in this whole recruiting and retention piece is the other R, the relationship piece. Mm-hmm. And I think we approach this often from a very mechanical position. Do this, then this, then this. We're very process oriented that way. We forget, or I don't think we forget necessarily, but we don't pay attention to the relationships that we have to build. And it's interesting, I was at an event last night with LULAC, right? And some of the questions I was just asking those students about, and their experience with USA Jobs and those types of things. And I came to realize that, when we send people out to events, we bring back these metrics, but again, they're very mechanical metrics, like how many people do you talk to, what's this and this and this. We don't send our people out there to gather any kind of feedback as to how we're doing, or if we're actually presenting ourselves the way they want, what they want to see. It's resonating with them, and that's externally. And I think we do. Trying to find a politically right word, but I'm just going to say the word suck. I think we suck at doing it internally also. I don't think that as an HR community we truly understand what our managers need and want. I don't think we help our managers understand for themselves what they need and want, And I think at the end of the day, a lot of it does come down to building those relationships and looking at it from, just the human standpoint, that it's all reliant on relationships, and it is about relationship building, whether it's building it with a pipeline, building it internally, or whatever.
It is interesting that the one organization, the one part of an organization that has human in its name, that the human resources organization or human capital organization, sometimes it's the least human in how it interacts with people. I've heard people say that they thought that HR's motto was "We're not happy until you're not happy." and I think that sometimes I still count myself as an HR person. I think sometimes we focus on what makes our job easier, right, and what makes it possible for us to get through what's sometimes a very large workload with limited resources. And in doing that, we lose sight of what's best for those human beings that we're trying to recruit, trying to keep in the organization. And that's really not helpful.
And it is a skill set, and if I can just make a plug for OPM, I mean, if any of you in the federal space are interested, OPM is doing some great work in the lab, and they are offering trainings and all types of experiential learning types of environments in the lab around human-centered design. So I've been fortunate to participate in some of that myself, and have been sending some team members in HR to that training specifically to try and make sure that we're attuned to this. So it's, if you haven't checked it out, I mean, I think it's a really bright spot of innovation within government and particularly within OPM. So I think, and it's, you know, it's very accessible in terms of federal agency partners who are interested in collaborating in that way.
And I know in DOI, I'm excited because I'm finally written a PD, and I'm actually in my talent management division going to hire a personnel or IO psychologist, you know, and it's coming out of the constructs of my workforce planning team, you know, and was, you know, and able to make the business case for that. I'm really excited about it because I think that's a different, or it's not necessarily different, but I think it's a needed a way to look at how we do that workforce planning and incorporating that recruitment, that human piece.
You should attend next month's meeting.
So let's move on to a slightly different aspect of recruiting. One of the things a lot of us found is that use of technology, use of better recruiting mechanisms has, in some cases, produced a lot of applicants. And agencies sometimes are getting, now and then agencies are experiencing shortages of applicants, but in a lot of jobs, folks are finding that they get an almost overwhelming number of applications. I know at the Department of Homeland Security, when we were recruiting in Customs and Border Protection, recruiting Border Patrol agents, I think we had over 100,000 applicants, which is kind of a large number. And one of the issues that I've heard people on the customer side, the hiring managers complain about, is that what they get on a referral list isn't necessarily what they would consider to be the best qualified candidates. Because there are so many applicants, you get a lot of them sometimes filtering through that maybe shouldn't filter through. I know from my own experience when I was at DLA and in DHS running HR, I would get a referral list of people who I didn't think could spell HR, and I'd have to ask why they had them. So clearly one of the solutions to that is better assessment techniques to be able to go through those tens or hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of applications. So could you talk a little bit about what your agency is doing in the area of assessment to get better candidates in front of the hiring managers?
I think across the government, you know, most agencies love to use that assessment questionnaire. It's the quickest option, it's the cheapest option, and it's the most used option. But it's not always the best way to assess candidates and to filter down that pool. And agencies really have to decide to make that investment into developing better assessment tools. One of the things that OPM really decided to make an investment for the whole government in developing some innovative online assessment tools that are called USA Hire, which really get at doing a really good job of getting to the general competencies of candidates and assessing them in new computer adaptive type ways, introducing computerized scenarios where you look at a little avatar video of a work scenario and have to answer questions based on that scenario and respond to them. It's also providing questions that increase in the complexity of the question depending on how you answer the last question. Now, these are great options. Are people investing in them? Not all the time. And that's where that commitment piece has to come, that yes, this is going to cost a little bit more, this is going to take a little bit more time, but it's so worth it on the back end. And just looking at the work that my own HR specialists do, where we've used these type of assessment tools, yes, it took us some more time in the beginning, but on the end, we were able to cut down about 30 to 50% of the time in reviewing applicants on the back end and providing a better quality referral list to hiring managers. And just something like that makes me so excited about the options that are out there, and then makes me want to invest more time up front.
Yeah, we've had a similar experience where we, have invested in some IO psychologists to help design multi-hurdle assessments beyond just the applicant questionnaire. And in my opinion, they are really a game changer for an organization to be able to design assessments. And there's, data out there that shows that organizations are typically able to make more and better selections once they're, using that multi-hurdle process, because it is, applicants are taking themselves out of consideration. The assessments get more and more robust as you go down, and you really help to hone in on the skills, which it's the applicant questionnaire alone is just very difficult to do that. And, short of investing in, those types of multi-hurdle assessments, I think also an underutilized tool is the interview. We've had a lot of talk in the federal space about structured interviews, and I think most agencies have gotten there or are going there, but there's real, richness to the interview process too that I think sometimes because we're in a hurry or sometimes because we just need to get the job filled, we overlook the power that can really have in the process as well. So I think, in my experience, organizations that really invest in that type of structured interview process tend to do better as well, at least on the back end. That's not going to help your problem on the front end if you're still getting a lot of applicants, but I think it certainly can really, help to tease out, who are the applicants that are the best for the job and would be the best fit for the organization.
And even if you look at the money you're saving in the long run, like how much you might have spent on, we used this quick assessment questionnaire, I got an applicant, we selected them, ended up paying them, $50,000 or $60,000 for a couple of years, and it didn't work out well. So you wasted $150,000, $200,000 on someone where you could have taken that money and developed a more robust assessment process up front and been able to come out with a better candidate. Some programs to even look at and model against that are not always ideal for your everyday situation, but just the President Management Fellows Program. It's a multi-hurdle process with all of these different types of assessments that are associated, but we get so much positive feedback on the candidates that are selected at the end of that type of process that it just shows, by just putting more of that time into the type of assessments that you're choosing and using, it just makes a difference in the long run.
But I think that's another big part of it is the investment, not just in the funding investment, but it's the time investment too. It's actually getting out in front of it. Post it and pray, or build it and they'll come. That's kind of our mentality, right? We're reacting to every job that we have come open. We might know it's coming open for 6 months, but we do nothing about it until it's actually going to be open, and then we react. And then the interview doesn't become part of our strategy for recruitment. It becomes a reaction to a list of people that we get, right? The posting's a reaction to the need that we have right this second. And so I think to be effective with all this stuff, there's that time investment, the thought investment, and thinking ahead about what are you really going to need in the future, and not just going for, okay, I had this person in the position, so I want to hire someone just like that again, and really start that workforce planning piece.
The other thing I think, agencies need to broaden their base, right? I think the first question I would ask myself is, do I have to post? There are a ton of avenues out there to federal agencies that you can recruit and have, through the veterans community, through other programs like returning Peace Corps volunteers. And we all know they're littered all throughout the CFR, but I don't think that agencies really think about targeting recruitment strategies within those special hiring authorities. And there's tremendous power in there. In the veterans community alone, I'd like to see more agencies take that approach where we kind of look at those populations where we know we have flexibility, and then how do we really mine that population to find the talent that we need that eliminates the need to do postings and worry about kind of all these other things that you leave to chance. So I feel like there's a lot of work that the community could do there to really think more strategically about how to leverage those authorities.
In the intelligence community, I want to give a shout out to our colleagues at NSA in particular. We have something called the applicant gateway that NSA is the executive agent for, and that the whole intelligence community is participating. And they will have some of those assessment tools, up front that we'll be able to leverage. I hope it's the, multiple hurdle, kind of a little more sophisticated, because I think where assessment tools have gotten kind of a little bit of a bad rap is when applicants, are going through and they end up inadvertently self-selecting out, screening out, because they, you know, it asks you to, you know, rate yourself on a competency scale, not recognizing it's going to kick you out if you're too honest, or, you know, a relative honesty scale. And often those that know how to trick it to get through the door are not the applicants that you're looking for.
By the way, the director for NSA candidate assessments is on the panel next month.
Oh, great.
Yes, Nick.
Wouldn't you want someone who really isn't qualified to be honest and say, no, I really don't have much skill in this,
Well, precisely.
and self-select that? One of the things that I find interesting, I've written a couple of blog posts about the hiring process, actually a lot of them about the hiring process. And in doing that, one of the things I did is I went out and started looking at job announcements on USA Jobs. And I probably looked at a couple hundred job announcements, which is really a brutal thing to do, and I wouldn't encourage you to do it unless you have to. But when I hear what the panelists are describing, that are some really good approaches to recruiting and assessing candidates, and then I look at the typical assessment questionnaire. The typical assessment questionnaire has subject and I'm an expert, I'm good, I'm okay, I stink. And you could write these questionnaires, and I'm sure some of them are, you could write these questionnaires in 5 minutes. And when you produce crap questionnaires, you get crapplicants. and you get applicants that the hiring manager is never going to want to hire. So what you guys are describing is so different from what I see in 98% of the job announcements I see out there now.
And I mean, what that says to me, and you know, I think, are we training our HR specialists for the right things? I don't think we are. I think the real, you know, for staffing specialists and that type of thing, we need people who are compliance experts, but we really need people who are better skilled at this type of work. And then, of course, it's complicated because so many of us rely on shared service center providers, and so then so it's a really, to me, it always struck me when I went to DEU training for the first time, the nanosecond that is spent on job analysis. And to me, that is the most critical thing, the most critical value a staffing specialist can bring to the conversation is how to actually analyze the job and parse it down and figure out what are the things that I actually need in this job. And there's virtually, no, at least at that time, there's virtually no time spent on that. But that's the skill we need to be training people to do, and that's where the IO psychology community really can go. Those folks like that are very well trained in that, but it's sometimes a hard sell to be able to get them into the organization.
Right, and then it's also bridging that with, I think our HR community, we need training in just the consultation piece. Yes. Because you'll talk to managers, they'll say, well, this isn't the candidate pool I was looking for, but you know, it very much was probably the candidate pool that they asked for. So they got what they asked for, they didn't get what they were looking for, you know, and a lot of that, the onus of that goes on to the HR to actually be able to do that job analysis, right? And then also to sit down and help the manager articulate what they're really looking for through that process, you know, and I think that, you know, that's part of that training that needs to happen out there.
It would be interesting to see how many agencies at the time they're developing a job announcement, are also developing the interview questions. So they have an understanding when they start what this entire recruitment process is going to look like. It's almost like it's an ad hoc process where they do one phase of it and then they think about the next phase and then they think about the next phase. And then they go talk to employee relations about how to get rid of this employee that they shouldn't have hired.
So we're experimenting, we're about to embark on a little experiment right now, and I'd be happy to share the results with you when we're done. I've had that same observation for years. There's all these actors. You've got the classification person that's writing the job, and then they're done. Then it goes over to somebody else who has to figure out, well, okay, I have this PD, and what does the assessment look like? And then they're done, and then it goes to the... So we've had that same idea of pulling all of that together in a different model so that you've got one person that's kind of taking it from start to finish and developing all the products for the job in that integrated consultative conversation with the manager. I think there's something to that. I've just never tested it, so we're going to try it out.
It's like a band where they're not only not playing at the same time, they're not even playing the same song. And all you've got is noise. And people say, well, why doesn't it sound like music? Why doesn't this sound like a good recruiting process?
What's
Because it
really
usually
unfor-
isn't.
What's really
Okay.
unfortunate is that as budget constraints took effect a couple of years ago, as the money wasn't there and the jobs weren't there, the thing that really was cut in the HR community was the training. So the expertise that used to be there is just not there anymore. And the part that's suffered the most is that job analysis process and learning how to develop a good assessment tools that you're going to use. And it's something that constantly needs to be rebuilt and constantly needs to be worked on. And a lot of times you don't find that happening in agencies.
We'll probably have time for one question from, yes?
Hi, I'm Camille Tootie. Ellen, you mentioned a Skype-like technology
Yes.
that you guys will be using. I wanted to know other technologies that you're looking at using in the future that are newer than the social media channels that you're currently using. What makes you excited?
So I talked a little bit about virtual career fairs. I know that the National Science Foundation is really doing some great work with their Scholarship for Service program, where they host almost like a fair, but more like an informational session for their colleges that they have partnerships around the country and the agencies that they're working with. And they bring them all together in this virtual environment where you can get on any time of night, you can find information, you can view recorded sessions, you can do live ones, you can have on-site interviews with hiring managers while you're on there, and this is all done maybe over the course of a couple of days. But just the innovation, the ability to do this virtually, the ability to get so many people involved and excited about it makes me excited. Just the thought that that's out there and available for agencies to use, I think is something that's on the cutting edge.
I just wanted to make a comment based on what Ellen said a few minutes ago is our April, one of the reasons we're doing accreditation and certification is to show that, where HR needs to be, become more strategic, talking about workforce planning, talk about, assessments and not just tactical. So, I mean, it's extremely important that more and more get educated and certified in the strategic aspects.
Great.
And
Can I ask, or I'll mention a technology piece that I'm not sure if it is exactly what you were asking, but the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency has a big push on the technology side. And although we don't recruit at the high school level, currently that's not a part of the population, I have been involved in the past where they focused on younger children, and they have on the website kind of games and things to get kids excited about the technologies and the kind of work that they might then find, a life passion for. And so it's not exactly what you're saying, but it's kind of hitting a different demographic and trying to increase the excitement and let them see that there is a federal job that they could aspire to.
so I think we are out of time. Panel, thank you very, very much. You were fascinating. And let's give them a round of applause.
And you took that.
So thanks everyone.